I'm Amanda, 32, and until last month, I thought my marriage to Brian was perfect. 5 years together, 3 years married, and I never imagined our annual family vacation would reveal the truth. When we arrived at the resort, my in-laws assigned me a separate table for dinner. No one spoke to me. When I asked Brian why, he just shrugged. It's just their way. I smiled and said, perfect. I have my own way too. The next morning changed everything. Before I continue, where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe to join my journey of self-discovery. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. But when you're in love, you tend to ignore the red flags waving right in front of your face. Brian and I met 6 years ago at my college roommate's wedding. I was the maid of honor, and he was a groomsman. Such a cliché beginning, right? But there was nothing cliché about our connection. Brian stood out from every man I'd ever dated. Intelligent, kind, ambitious, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. I was 26 then, finally establishing myself in my marketing career after years of grinding through entry-level positions. I'd just been promoted to marketing manager at a tech startup in Seattle, and I was fiercely proud of my independence. Dating wasn't even on my radar, but Brian changed that in one evening. Our first conversation lasted 5 hours. We closed down the wedding reception and continued talking in the hotel lobby until 3 a.m. He asked thoughtful questions about my career and actually listened to my answers. We discovered we both loved hiking, had the same taste in obscure indie films, and shared similar values about life and family. Brian called the next day, and within 6 months, we were inseparable. He was 29, already successful in finance, the eldest son in the Caldwell family, old money from Boston, I would later learn. The Caldwells owned investment properties throughout New England and had the kind of wealth that's never discussed directly but is evident in everything from their vacation homes to their casual references to the foundation. I met his parents, Margaret and Richard, 3 months into our relationship when they visited Seattle. From the beginning, something felt off. Margaret assessed me with calculating eyes while asking pointed questions about my family background. My parents are teachers from a small town in Oregon, hardly impressive by Caldwell standards. When I mentioned my marketing career, Richard nodded dismissively and changed the subject to Brian's recent work achievements. Still, Brian seemed different from them, warmer, more genuine. He apologized for his parents' behavior afterward. They're just old-fashioned, he explained. They'll warm up to you. Our wedding happened 1.5 years after we met. I wanted something simple, but Margaret had other ideas. Suddenly, I was caught in a whirlwind of decisions that weren't really mine to make. The guest list grew from our planned 75 to over 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. My one bridesmaid was dwarfed by Brian's 5 groomsmen, all childhood friends from his private school days. When I expressed concern to Brian, he gently suggested it was easier to go with the flow to keep the peace. My own family provided such a contrast. My parents, Karen and David, welcomed Brian warmly from day one. My younger sister Jessica teased him like she'd known him forever. Our home was always filled with laughter and open communication. Nothing was off limits for discussion, and everyone's opinions mattered equally. During the first year of our marriage, Brian shielded me from his parents' subtle criticisms. He'd filter their comments, telling me only the positive parts. We lived in Seattle, safely distant from Boston, building our life together. I threw myself into supporting his career, hosting dinner parties for his colleagues, and creating the perfect home. Meanwhile, my own career continued to advance. I became the marketing director at my company, managing a team of 5. Brian traveled frequently for work, but we made our time together count. Weekend getaways, surprise date nights, thoughtful gifts. Our marriage seemed enviably strong. We talked about starting a family soon, though Brian always wanted to wait until the time was right. One tradition we couldn't escape was the annual Caldwell family vacation. For the first 2 years of our marriage, we managed to avoid it, First because of my work deadlines, then because of Brian's business trip. This year, however, there was no getting out of it. Richard was retiring as CEO of Caldwell Investments, passing the reins to Brian's younger brother James. The entire extended family would gather at an exclusive beach resort in the Hamptons to celebrate. "It's just a week," Brian assured me as we packed. "Dad's retirement is a big deal. We need to be there." I nodded, ignoring the knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "Of course. It'll be fine." If only I'd known how wrong I was. The Hamptons greeted us with perfect early summer weather, sunny, 75 degrees, with a gentle breeze coming off the Atlantic. Our resort, the Ocean View, was everything its 5-star rating promised: manicured grounds, private beach access, and suites larger than our first apartment. As our taxi pulled into the circular driveway, I spotted the rest of the Caldwell family already gathered on the veranda. Margaret, impeccable in white linen, noticed us first. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly when her gaze landed on me. "Darling," she called to Brian, arms outstretched. She embraced him warmly before turning to me with significantly less enthusiasm. "Amanda, you made it." Richard's greeting was equally tepid, a brief nod in my direction before clapping Brian on the back. "Son, perfect timing. James was just telling us about the Anderson acquisition." Within moments, Brian was absorbed into a business discussion with his father and brother, leaving me standing awkwardly with my luggage. No one offered to help. "Let me show you to your room," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Stephanie, Brian's younger sister. At 30, she was the only Caldwell sibling I'd ever felt comfortable around. "They'll be talking business for hours." As we walked through the lobby, Stephanie filled me in on who was attending: James and his wife Allison, their 2 children, Michael, the youngest brother, and his new fiancée Grace, Aunt Patricia and Uncle George, and cousins Emily and Thomas with their respective spouses. "Quite the family reunion," I commented, trying to sound enthusiastic. Stephanie replied noncommittally. "Fair warning. Mom's been planning this for months. Everything is scheduled down to the minute." Our suite was beautiful. Ocean view, king-sized bed, luxury amenities, but I barely had time to freshen up before Stephanie reminded me that dinner was in 30 minutes. "Don't be late," she warned. "Dad hates tardiness." I changed quickly into a navy blue sundress, applied fresh makeup, and met Brian in the sitting area. He'd been texting with James since we arrived. "Ready?" I asked, adjusting his collar affectionately. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "Let's get this over with." The resort's private dining room was arranged with 2 large tables. As we entered, Margaret waved Brian over to the main table where the family was already seated. I moved to follow, but she stopped me with a raised hand. "Amanda, dear, we've arranged for you to sit at that table," she said, gesturing to a smaller table near the window. "We're rather cramped at this one with all the family catching up." I stared at her, certain I'd misunderstood. The family table had at least 3 empty seats. "I'm sorry." "Space reasons," Richard explained without looking up from his menu. "We need to discuss some private family business matters." I looked at Brian, waiting for him to object. He glanced between his parents and me, hesitation clear on his face. "It's just for tonight," he said quietly. "Dad wants to go over some retirement details." "But your cousin's spouses are at that table," I pointed out, nodding toward Emily's husband and Thomas's wife, both comfortably seated among the family. "They've been in the family longer," Margaret replied smoothly. "They're familiar with the business discussions." We'd been married 3 years. How much longer did I need to be in the family? I forced a laugh, trying to treat it as a misunderstanding. "Surely there's room for one more." I promised not to take up much space. No one laughed with me. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. "Amanda," Brian murmured, a warning in his tone. Humiliation washed over me. Rather than create a scene, I nodded stiffly and moved to the separate table. Throughout the meal, I picked at my food while watching the animated conversation at the family table. No one came to join me. No one even looked my way. I might as well have been invisible. Later that night, in our suite, I confronted Brian. What was that about? I've never been so embarrassed. He was already loosening his tie, seemingly unbothered. It's not a big deal. Dad wanted to discuss confidential business matters. That Emily's husband is privy to, but I'm not? He works for the company, Amanda. And what about tomorrow? Will I be sitting alone again? Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. Can we not do this? I'm tired, and it's been a long day. Do what, exactly? Ask why your family treats me like an unwelcome stranger. You're overreacting. It was just seating arrangements. I tried to explain how it felt to be so blatantly excluded, but Brian's responses grew increasingly dismissive. Eventually, he cut me off. Look, my parents have their ways. This week is about Dad's retirement, not about you. Can we please just get through it without drama? His words stung like a slap. I retreated to the bathroom, blinking back tears as I removed my makeup. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself, the confident marketing executive reduced to begging for a seat at the table with her own family. I made a silent promise to myself. Tomorrow would be different. I'd try harder to connect with the Caldwells. Surely this was all a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with some effort on my part. How naive I was. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through our oceanfront windows. I woke feeling determined. Today would be better. I'd make more effort, be more engaging, find common ground with the Caldwells. I selected a casual but elegant outfit, white capris and a coral blouse that Brian once said brought out the warmth in my complexion. I styled my hair carefully and applied light, natural makeup. Brian seemed pleased as we walked to breakfast together, his hand resting comfortably on the small of my back. My optimism lasted approximately 90 seconds into breakfast. Brian, darling, your father's saved you a seat, Margaret called as we entered the terrace dining area. Once again, the family occupied one large table, and once again, there was a separate smaller table, obviously for me. Before I could protest, Brian squeezed my hand apologetically and joined his family. No discussion. No defense. Just immediate compliance. I stood frozen for a moment, feeling every pair of eyes in the restaurant on me. A server mercifully guided me to my table, bringing coffee without being asked. I thanked her quietly, fighting the burning sensation behind my eyes. From my isolated position, I watched the Caldwells planning their day. Margaret was distributing printed itineraries, actual printed schedules, while everyone nodded along enthusiastically. The ladies will be shopping in East Hampton this morning, she announced. We have appointments at 3 boutiques, followed by lunch at Le Bernardin. I perked up. Shopping wasn't my favorite activity, but at least it was an opportunity to be included. Margaret continued, Allison, Grace, Patricia, Emily, and I will take the first car at 10. Stephanie, you'll join us, won't you? Stephanie, who had been pushing a strawberry around her plate, looked up. Sure, Mom. Not once did Margaret glance my way or mention my name. The message was crystal clear. This was not an invitation extended to me. As breakfast concluded, Brian stopped by my table briefly. We're doing a golf thing with Dad today. Will you be okay on your own? Your mother arranged a shopping trip for the ladies, I said. Was I supposed to be included? Brian's expression turned uncomfortable. I think that's more of their tradition. Been doing it for years. And when exactly do I get to become part of these traditions? He checked his watch. I've got to go. Dad's waiting. Why don't you enjoy the spa or something? Treat yourself. He kissed my forehead quickly and was gone before I could respond. Left alone at the resort while everyone departed for their exclusive activities, I wandered down to the beach. The private stretch of sand was nearly empty at mid-morning. I selected a lounge chair far from anyone else and stared out at the ocean, fighting an overwhelming sense of isolation. Would you like a drink, ma'am? A friendly voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a young woman in the resort staff uniform, her name tag reading Caitlin. It's a bit early, but honestly, yes. Something with rum, please. Caitlin smiled sympathetically. Coming right up. When she returned with my pina colada, she lingered. First time at the ocean view? That obvious, huh? You just look a little lost. Everyone else in your party left about an hour ago. Something about her kind expression broke through my defenses. I'm here with my husband's family, but apparently I didn't make the cut for today's activities. Caitlin raised an eyebrow. Family dynamics at resorts are kind of my specialty after 5 seasons here. I've seen everything from tearful reunions to full-blown dynasty wars over inheritance. Despite myself, I laughed. Where does daughter-in-law banished to separate tables fall on that spectrum? Mid-range passive-aggressive territory. Classic old money move. She glanced around to ensure no managers were nearby. Look, if you need anything while you're here, just ask for me. Sometimes having an ally makes all the difference. After Caitlin left, I called my best friend Rachel back in Seattle. They did what? Rachel's indignation was exactly what I needed to hear. Put me at a completely separate table. Like I'm not family after 3 years of marriage. That's beyond rude, Amanda. What did Brian say? I sighed. Not much. He keeps making excuses for them. Honey, that's not okay. You need to talk to him. Really talk to him. I've tried. He just says it's their way, and I need to adapt. Their way is to treat you like garbage? That's not a way. That's just being terrible people. After hanging up, I tried to enjoy my enforced solitude. I swam in the ocean, read my book, and even dozed in the sun. Around 2, I spotted the Caldwells returning to the beach, the men from golfing, the women from shopping. They gathered in a cluster of lounge chairs about 50 yards from mine. I debated internally before deciding to join them. Grabbing my things, I walked over with what I hoped was a casual, confident air. How was golf? I asked, setting my towel on an empty chair beside Brian. There was a moment of awkward silence before James answered, Good. Dad beat us all, as usual. I smiled, trying to engage. And shopping? Find anything nice? Margaret barely glanced at me. The boutiques were divine. Stephanie found the most gorgeous summer dress. I turned to Stephanie hopefully, but she was suddenly very interested in applying sunscreen. Before I could attempt another conversation starter, Richard began discussing the dinner plans for that evening. I've reserved the private dining room again. They're preparing a special menu for Dad's retirement celebration, James announced. Will there be speeches? Asked Allison, James's wife. Brief ones, Margaret replied. Richard dislikes long-winded tributes. The conversation continued as if I weren't there. When I tried to add a comment about Brian's talent for public speaking, Aunt Patricia talked right over me, launching into a story about a previous family celebration. After 30 excruciating minutes, I retreated to our suite, claiming a headache. No one, not even Brian, seemed particularly concerned by my departure. That evening's dinner was a repeat of the previous night, me at my solitary table while the family engaged in animated conversation without me. The only difference was that this time, I was prepared for the exclusion. It didn't make it hurt any less. Brian joined me in our suite late that night, slightly tipsy from celebratory champagne. You disappeared early, he noted, loosening his tie. Did I? I was sitting 8 feet away from you for 3 hours. He sighed heavily. Amanda, please. It was Dad's night. It's been 2 days, Brian. No one has spoken more than 10 words to me. Your mother literally pretends I don't exist. And you've done nothing about it. What exactly do you want me to do? Create a scene during my father's retirement dinner. I want you to acknowledge that the way they're treating me is wrong. I want you to stand up for me as your wife. Brian's expression hardened. Can't you just adapt for 1 week? It's important to me. Those words crystallized everything. It was important to him, not that I feel welcomed or respected, but that I silently endure being treated as less than everyone else. I see, I said quietly. Good. He mistook my response for agreement. Let's just get some sleep. As Brian fell into easy slumber beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I was questioning everything about our marriage. Had I been so blinded by love that I'd failed to see what was right in front of me? A husband who would always prioritize his family's ways over my feelings? A lifetime of being the outsider looking in? Sleep eluded me as these painful questions circled my mind. The third day of our vacation dawned bright and clear, but my mood couldn't have been darker. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with revelations about my marriage that I couldn't unsee. Brian had already left the suite when I woke. A note on his pillow explained he was having an early breakfast with his father to discuss some business matters. I took my time getting ready, dreading another day of isolation. When I finally made my way to the terrace for breakfast, I found the Caldwell family already midway through their meal. No one acknowledged my arrival except Stephanie, who offered a weak smile before returning her attention to her phone. Resigning myself to my now familiar separate table, I approached the group first to at least say good morning. Before I could speak, Margaret's crisp voice cut through the conversation. We've already ordered, Amanda. You'll need to flag down your own server. I stood there, stunned by the rudeness, as the family conversation continued without missing a beat. No one, not even Brian, seemed to find her behavior inappropriate. I retreated to my designated table, cheeks burning with humiliation. A kind server quickly took my order, her sympathetic glance telling me she'd witnessed the exchange. As I picked at my eggs and berries, I found myself positioned behind a large decorative plant, partially concealed from the family table, but with a clear audio channel to their conversation. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name mentioned, I froze. I simply don't understand what Brian sees in her, Margaret was saying, her voice low but distinct. No family connections, no significant assets, and that marketing job she's so proud of is hardly impressive. The girl tries too hard, Richard agreed. No natural class. I sat paralyzed, my fork suspended midway to my mouth. How long do we think this will last? Asked an unfamiliar voice. Uncle George, perhaps. The Prescott girl is still unmarried. Her father mentioned she asks about Brian occasionally. Don't start, Mother, came Brian's voice, though his tone was more weary than defensive. Amanda is my wife. For now, Margaret replied. Marriages can be undone, darling. Especially when there are no children involved yet. I notice you've been sensible enough to delay on that front. We're still getting established, Brian replied vaguely. Well, thank goodness for that small mercy, Margaret continued. Much simpler this way when you finally come to your senses. The conversation shifted to other topics, but I could no longer hear anything through the rushing sound in my ears. My entire body felt cold despite the warm morning. They were actively discussing the end of my marriage as if it were inevitable, a temporary inconvenience to be managed. And Brian. Brian hadn't defended me. Not really. Just a token protest before allowing the conversation to continue. I fled to the nearest restroom, barely making it into a stall before violent sobs overtook me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The pain was physical, as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. Are you okay in there? A gentle knock accompanied the concerned question. I recognized Caitlin's voice, but couldn't respond through my tears. I'm coming in, all right? The stall door opened. I'd been too distraught to lock it, and Caitlin knelt beside me. Hey, deep breaths. You're having a panic attack. She helped me focus on my breathing until the worst of it passed. When I could finally speak, the whole story poured out of me. The separate tables, the exclusion from activities, and finally, the devastating conversation I'd overheard. That's beyond cruel, Caitlin said, handing me another tissue. No one deserves to be treated that way. The worst part is that Brian knows. He knows, and he's letting it happen. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Jessica. Attached was a photo from my parents' anniversary celebration last month. My family gathered around a table, laughing, with Brian and me in the center. Everyone looking genuinely happy to be together. The contrast was stark and painful. My family had welcomed Brian with open arms. They'd made him feel like one of their own from day one. And in return, his family treated me like an unwanted intruder. That evening's dinner was a formal affair celebrating Richard's decades at Caldwell Investments. I'd spent the afternoon alone in our suite, alternating between tears and anger, avoiding everyone. I'd considered feigning illness to skip the dinner entirely, but ultimately decided I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of driving me away. I wore my best dress, a sleek black sheath that had cost a month's salary, and did my makeup impeccably. If I was going to be excluded, I would at least look stunning while it happened. The private dining room had been transformed with elegant decorations. A slideshow of Richard's career achievements played on a screen. Once again, I was directed to my separate table, though this time it had been positioned even further from the family. Midway through the main course, Richard stood to make a speech. He spoke about legacy, family traditions, and the importance of keeping the Caldwell name synonymous with excellence. "I've been blessed with 3 fine sons who understand what it means to be a Caldwell," he said, raising his glass to Brian, James, and Michael. "And I look forward to the next generation carrying on our values." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing briefly on me. Though I would remind everyone that it's not just about having children, it's about having the right kind of children with the right kind of background. Quality over quantity, as we say in investments. The dig was so blatant that even some family members looked uncomfortable. Brian, however, actually chuckled along with his father. I sat there, utterly stunned. It wasn't just exclusion anymore. It was active hostility. After dinner, I confronted Brian in our suite. "Did you hear what your father said?" That was a direct insult to me, to my family. Brian loosened his tie, looking annoyed. "Dad was talking about investment strategy, Amanda. Not everything is about you." "Are you serious?" He literally looked right at me when he said it. "You're being paranoid. This week is stressful enough without you creating drama over nothing." Nothing? They put me at a separate table. They exclude me from every activity. "Your mother was discussing annulling our marriage at breakfast." Brian's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. "You were eavesdropping on my family?" "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was eating breakfast when your mother started talking about replacing me with some Prescott girl." He ran his hands through his hair, frustration evident. "Look, my parents are traditional. They have certain expectations. They'll come around eventually." "It's been 3 years, Brian. When exactly will they come around?" He shrugged helplessly. "It's just their way, Amanda. You need to get used to it." Those words, so casual, so dismissive of my pain, broke something inside me. The man I loved, who had promised to be my partner in all things, was telling me to accept being treated as less than human by his family. I took a deep breath, surprising myself with how calm I suddenly felt. "Perfect," I said, smiling for the first time that day. "I have my own way, too." Brian looked relieved, misinterpreting my response as acceptance. "Great. Let's get some sleep and start fresh tomorrow." As he readied himself for bed, completely oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred within me, I made a silent promise to myself. Tomorrow would indeed be a fresh start, but not the kind Brian was expecting. While Brian slept soundly beside me, I lay wide awake, my mind racing. The digital clock on the nightstand read 1:27 a.m., then 2:15, then 3:08 as I mentally revisited every moment of our relationship through this new, painful lens. How had I missed the signs? They'd been there from the beginning. Brian's reluctance to stand up to his parents, his dismissal of my concerns, the subtle ways he'd always prioritized his family's approval over my feelings. On our second date, he changed our dinner reservation when his mother called with a last-minute invitation to join them. At the time, I'd found it sweet that he was close with his family. Now I saw it for what it was, the first instance of me being secondary to the Caldwell's wishes. Then there was our wedding. I'd wanted a simple ceremony at my parents' beautiful backyard in Oregon, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. Instead, we'd had Margaret's society extravaganza in Boston, with hundreds of Caldwell connections and business associates. My parents had looked so out of place among the wealthy elite, though they'd never complained. Even our home in Seattle, I'd fallen in love with a charming craftsman near my office, but Brian had insisted on a modern penthouse in the financial district because it better reflected our status. His status, I now realized. The most telling sign had been our discussions about starting a family. Initially, we'd planned to begin trying after 2 years of marriage. But whenever the topic arose, Brian found reasons to delay. We should be more financially secure. Despite our substantial combined income, we should travel more first. We should wait until his work schedule calmed down. Had he been stalling because his parents didn't approve of me as the mother of their grandchildren? As these realizations washed over me, something unexpected happened. The hurt began to transform into clarity, and with clarity came resolve. I wasn't going to continue being the family doormat. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of respect from people who had decided I was unworthy before they even knew me. Most importantly, I wasn't going to remain married to a man who wouldn't stand beside me as an equal partner. I slipped out of bed and moved to the suite's sitting area with my phone. My first call was to my mother. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. "Amanda? Is everything all right?" Hearing her concerned voice broke through my composure, and I found myself crying as I explained the situation. "Oh, sweetheart," she said when I'd finished. "I'm so sorry you're being treated this way. Am I overreacting, Mom? Am I expecting too much? Absolutely not. Family doesn't treat family the way they're treating you. And Brian, well, a husband should never let anyone disrespect his wife, not even his parents." "I don't think I can do this anymore." There was a brief silence before she responded. "Whatever you decide, Dad and I are here for you. You can come home anytime. You know that, right?" Her unconditional support strengthened my resolve. After we hung up, I began formulating a plan. First, I checked flights from New York to Seattle. There was one leaving at 2 p.m. the following day with available seats. I didn't book it yet. There was something I needed to do first. Next, I researched nearby hotels. The Montauk Point Resort was even more exclusive than the Ocean View and had a cancellation for a deluxe suite. The rate was exorbitant, but I didn't care. I made the reservation using my personal credit card, the one Brian didn't have access to. I then opened my banking app and transferred a significant amount from our joint savings to my private account. Not everything, just my fair contribution over the years. We'd need to properly divide assets later, but I wanted financial security for my immediate needs. By 5 a.m., my plan was fully formed. I began packing most of my belongings, leaving out only what I'd need for the morning. As I organized my suitcase, I found the anniversary card Brian had given me just 2 months ago, to my perfect partner and the love of my life. The words rang hollow now. Around 6:30 a.m., I heard Brian stirring. I quickly closed my suitcase and slid it into the closet before slipping into the bathroom to shower. When I emerged, he was checking emails on his phone. "You're up early," he commented, not looking up. "Couldn't sleep." "I'm going to grab coffee." He nodded absently. "I'm golfing with Dad and the guys again today. Mother's arranged some spa-thing for the ladies. You should join them." I almost laughed at the irony. Now he was suggesting I join activities I hadn't been invited to. "I'll think about it." I made my way to the resort lobby where I found Caitlin just starting her morning shift. "Good morning," she greeted me, then lowered her voice. "You look like a woman on a mission." "I am. I need a favor." 20 minutes later, I'd explained my plan. Caitlin not only agreed to help, but connected me with the resort manager, who was sympathetic once she understood the situation. "We pride ourselves on making all guests feel welcome," he assured me. "What you're requesting is absolutely doable. With the resort staff's assistance, arrangements were made. A discreet bellhop would collect my luggage from the room while the family was at breakfast. Transportation to Montauk Point Resort would be ready whenever I gave the signal. A second room would be booked at the Ocean View under Brian's name alone for tonight, the charges added to our existing bill. I returned to our suite to find Brian dressed for golf, checking his watch impatiently. "I'm heading down to breakfast," he said. "Everyone's probably already there." "I'll join you shortly," I replied, maintaining a neutral expression. "Just need to finish getting ready." After he left, I completed my preparations. I dressed carefully in my most confident outfit, a crimson sheath dress that always made me feel powerful, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me on my college graduation. I applied my makeup meticulously, taking extra care with my signature red lipstick. Before leaving, I wrote a brief note and left it on Brian's pillow, "Joining you for breakfast. We need to talk." As I walked toward the dining terrace, I felt strangely calm. The anxiety and hurt of the past 3 days had crystallized into absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, I would no longer accept being treated as less than I deserved. At the entrance to the terrace, I paused, took a deep breath, and straightened my shoulders. The Caldwell family was assembled at their usual table, Brian among them. My separate table was set and waiting. Not today. Not ever again. The breakfast terrace fell silent as I walked in. Perhaps it was my confident stride, or the crimson dress that stood out among the pastels and neutrals the Caldwell women favored, but every head turned in my direction. I approached the family table directly, standing at its head where Richard sat. No one spoke. Even Margaret seemed momentarily lost for words. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I hope you don't mind, but I've made some changes to today's arrangements." Brian's brow furrowed in confusion. "Amanda, what are you?" I held up my hand, silencing him with a gesture. 3 days ago, I would never have dreamed of being so assertive, but the Amanda who had arrived at this resort no longer existed. For the past 3 days, I've been seated separately from my family. I've been excluded from activities, ignored during conversations, and treated as an unwelcome intruder. I let my gaze sweep across each face at the table. At first, I was hurt and confused. Then I was angry. Now I'm simply clear. Richard cleared his throat. "Amanda, this is hardly the time or place." "Actually, Richard, this is exactly the time and place. You see, I heard your conversation yesterday morning." I turned to Margaret. "All of it. About how I'm not good enough for Brian. About the Prescott girl, who would make a better wife. About how fortunate it is that we don't have children yet, making it easier to undo our mistake of a marriage." Margaret's face drained of color. Several family members looked away uncomfortably. "What you may not realize," I continued, "is that I've been taking notes this entire vacation. About how you treat people you consider beneath you. About the casual cruelty you disguise as family tradition. About the way you've raised your sons to believe that loyalty to the Caldwell name trumps basic human decency." I shifted my attention to Brian, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and embarrassment. "And I've especially been taking notes about my husband, who has watched his wife be humiliated for 3 days and done nothing except tell her to adapt." "Amanda," Brian hissed, "you're making a scene." "No, Brian. For the first time since we arrived, I'm standing up for myself. There's a difference." I reached into my purse and withdrew the resort envelope containing the key to Brian's new room. "I've made some arrangements. I've booked myself into the Montauk Point Resort for the remainder of this vacation. You'll be staying here in a separate room that's been prepared for you." Brian's jaw dropped. "You're leaving?" "I'm choosing myself. Something I should have done the first time your mother put me at a separate table and you didn't object." Margaret found her voice at last. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Brian, control your wife." The phrase, "control your wife," ignited something fierce within me. "That's the problem, Margaret. You think wives are possessions to be controlled, not partners to be respected. Brian might agree with you, but I don't. I placed the room key on the table in front of Brian. You have a decision to make. About what kind of man you want to be. About whether your marriage means more to you than your parents' approval. I'll be at Montauk Point until tomorrow afternoon when I fly back to Seattle. You know how to reach me if you decide I'm worth fighting for. The silence around the table was deafening. Some family members looked horrified, others uncomfortable, and a few, Stephanie and, surprisingly, James's wife Allison, seemed almost impressed. Brian finally stood. You can't just walk out on our vacation. On our marriage. I'm not walking out on our marriage, Brian. I'm giving it one last chance. But I need you to prove that we actually have one, a partnership of equals, not a convenient arrangement where I'm expected to silently accept disrespect. I turned to leave, then paused, facing the family one final time. Oh, and Richard? Congratulations on your retirement. I hope the legacy you're so proud of is worth the damage you've done to your son's happiness. With that, I walked out of the terrace with my head held high. In the lobby, Caitlin gave me a subtle thumbs up as a resort attendant approached to inform me my car was waiting. My luggage had already been loaded into the sleek black SUV that would take me to Montauk Point. As we pulled away from the ocean view, I caught a glimpse of Brian running onto the driveway, looking panicked. For a moment, my resolve wavered, the urge to run back to him, to fix things, to make peace at any cost, was almost overwhelming. But then I remembered Margaret's cold voice, "Control your wife." I remembered Richard's pointed comments about the right kind of background. Most of all, I remembered Brian's casual dismissal, "It's just their way." I didn't look back again as the car pulled onto the main road. The 20-minute drive to Montauk Point gave me time to process what I'd just done. Had I overreacted? Burned bridges that could never be rebuilt? Possibly. But for the first time in days, maybe even years, I felt like myself again. Not Brian Caldwell's wife, not the outsider struggling to please impossible in-laws, just Amanda, strong, independent, and unwilling to accept less than she deserved. Montauk Point Resort was even more beautiful than the ocean view, with a more relaxed, less stuffy atmosphere. My suite overlooked the Atlantic, with a private balcony and a bottle of champagne waiting on ice. The note attached read simply, "Compliments of the management. Here's to new beginnings." I spent the day practicing radical self-care. I booked a massage at the spa, had lunch on my balcony, and walked along the private beach, phone turned off to avoid the barrage of calls and texts I knew would be coming from Brian. By sunset, I felt centered enough to turn my phone back on. As expected, there were 12 missed calls from Brian, along with messages ranging from angry, "I can't believe you embarrassed me like that," to pleading, "Please come back, we can work this out." There were also supportive texts from Rachel and my sister Jessica, both of whom had apparently received panicked calls from Brian trying to locate me. "Whatever you decided, I'm with you," Rachel had written. "Your in-laws sound like nightmare material." I ordered room service for dinner and ate on my balcony, watching the stars emerge over the ocean. Around 9, there was a knock at my door. For a moment, I thought it might be Brian, having tracked me down. Instead, I found a resort staff member with a package. "Delivery for you, Mrs. Caldwell." Inside was a small gift bag from the resort boutique containing a journal and pen, along with a note from Caitlin for recording the next chapter. "Your speech this morning inspired everyone on staff who's ever been treated as less than." "Thank you." I smiled, oddly touched by this gesture from someone who was essentially a stranger, but had shown me more kindness than my husband's family ever had. I slept deeply that night, without dreams, waking to sunshine and the sound of waves. For breakfast, I took my coffee to the beach and watched the early morning swimmers. My phone showed more missed calls from Brian, but also an unexpected text from Stephanie. "I admire what you did." I've never had the courage to stand up to them like that. Around noon, as I was considering lunch options, there was another knock at my door. This time, It was Brian. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, still wearing yesterday's rumpled clothes. "How did you find me?" I asked, not inviting him in. Called every resort in the area until I found one with an Amanda Caldwell registered. Persistent. "Amanda, please. Can we talk?" I studied him for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. He entered the suite but remained standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. "You look good," he said, gesturing to my casual beach outfit. "Rested. Amazing what a night away from constant belittlement can do." He winced. "I deserve that." "Yes, you do. Why are you here, Brian?" He took a deep breath. "To apologize. You were right. About everything. The way my family treated you was inexcusable, and the way I failed to stand up for you is even worse." "Why now? Is it because I finally made a scene? Embarrassed the mighty Caldwells in public?" "No." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's because after you left, I saw my family through your eyes for the first time. The way they talked about you, dismissed you. I realized I've been complicit in something ugly my entire life, not just during this vacation." He moved to the balcony doors, looking out at the ocean. "After you left, Dad started talking about damage control, about how we needed to manage you. Mom suggested cutting off access to our accounts until you came to your senses. Even James, who I thought was the reasonable one, talked about getting the family lawyers involved." "And what did you do?" Brian turned back to face me. "I told them all to go to hell." I couldn't hide my surprise. "You what?" "I told them I was disgusted with how they'd treated my wife. I said if they couldn't respect you, they couldn't respect me either." Then I walked out. Part of me wanted to throw my arms around him, to celebrate this act of defiance that had been 3 years coming. But the cautious part held back. "Words are easy, Brian. Where have you been for the past 24 hours? "Driving around, thinking. About what kind of man I want to be. About whether I'm brave enough to choose my wife over my family's approval." He stepped closer. "I want to be worthy of you, Amanda. I want to be the husband you deserve. And if your parents never accept me, if they never change their ways, then they don't get to be part of our lives. It's that simple." I studied his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. "It took me leaving for you to reach this conclusion." "Yes, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm here now asking for another chance. Not because I'm controlling you or because I think you're overreacting, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you, a real partnership, not whatever dysfunctional model my parents have." I didn't respond immediately. 3 days ago, I would have accepted his apology instantly, eager to smooth things over. But I was different now. "I need time, Brian. And if we're going to try again, we need counseling, both as a couple and you individually. You have 32 years of unhealthy family dynamics to unpack." He nodded. "Anything. Whatever it takes. I'm flying back to Seattle tomorrow. I think we should take some time apart when we get home. Figure out what we both really want." Pain flashed across his face, but he accepted my terms without argument. "I understand. Can I at least drive you to the airport tomorrow?" I considered this, then nodded. "That would be fine." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "I'm proud of you, Amanda, for standing up for yourself when I couldn't. You're the strongest person I know." After he left, I returned to the balcony, feeling oddly peaceful. I didn't know if our marriage could be saved, but for the first time since this vacation began, I felt hopeful. Not because Brian had finally stood up to his family, but because I had finally stood up for myself. Whatever happened next, I would never go back to being the woman who silently accepted a separate table. 1 week later, the Seattle rain tapped gently against my living room windows as I curled up on the couch with a mug of tea. After the emotional hurricane of the Hamptons, the familiar comfort of my own space felt like a sanctuary. I'd taken a week off work to process everything that had happened and to consider what I wanted for my future. The remainder of my solo vacation at Montauk Point had been surprisingly healing. After Brian's visit, I'd spent my time journaling, walking on the beach, and reconnecting with myself. The resort staff, having somehow heard about my situation, treated me with special care, little upgrades and courtesies that made me feel valued and seen. Brian had indeed driven me to the airport as promised. The ride was mostly silent, but not uncomfortable. At the departures terminal, he'd helped with my luggage and then handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I'd asked. "The name and number of a marriage counselor in Seattle. And a therapist for me." His voice had been steady, his eyes clear. "I've already made appointments for both." That small act of initiative had meant more than any grand gesture could have. It showed me he was serious about change. We'd agreed to a 3-week separation, Brian staying with a friend while I remained in our apartment. We would communicate minimally during this time, focusing instead on individual reflection. True to his word, Brian had begun therapy immediately upon our return. He texted me once, 3 days after we got back. "First session was hard. Realizing how much I've normalized dysfunctional behavior. Thank you for pushing me to do this." I hadn't responded, not out of coldness, but because I was maintaining the boundaries we'd established. My own journey that week had been intense. I'd spent hours talking with Rachel and my sister, unpacking the subtle ways I'd compromised myself throughout our marriage. I'd reconnected with friends I'd neglected, rediscovered hobbies I'd set aside, and begun rebuilding the parts of myself that had been slowly eroding under the Caldwell influence. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from my mother, checking in. "How are you feeling today?" I smiled, typing back, "Better. Clearer. Taking it day by day." She responded almost immediately. "That's my girl. Dad and I are here whenever you need us." Their unconditional support had been my lifeline. The day after I returned from New York, they'd driven 3 hours from Oregon just to have dinner with me. No questions asked, no pressure applied, just love and presence. The contrast with the Caldwells couldn't have been starker. Margaret had called exactly once, leaving a voicemail so stiffly formal it bordered on parody. "Amanda, this is Margaret Caldwell. While I think your behavior at the resort was inappropriate, Richard and I are willing to discuss moving forward in a more productive manner. Please have Brian call us when you've had time to reflect." I'd deleted the message without responding. The most surprising post-vacation contact had come from Stephanie. She'd emailed a long, heartfelt message about growing up in the Caldwell household, how she'd always felt suffocated by their expectations, and how watching me stand up to them had inspired her to make changes in her own life. "I've started therapy too," she'd written. "I want to break the cycle before I have children of my own." We'd exchanged several messages since, forming a genuine connection for the first time. She'd even suggested meeting for coffee, independent of Brian or the rest of the family. As for Brian and me, we had our first marriage counseling session scheduled for tomorrow. I was nervous but determined to be honest about what I needed, what I deserved, in our relationship. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reflections. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw Brian, looking uncertain, a small package in his hands. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. We'd agreed on 3 weeks of separation, and it had only been 1. "I know we said limited contact," he began, "but I found this while packing some things at my friend's place. It seemed important to give it to you now." He handed me the package, neatly wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind I'd admired once in a bookstore window, but had deemed too expensive to justify. "Open it," he encouraged softly. I did. On the first page, he'd written, "For recording our new beginning, if you decide to give us that chance. Either way, your story deserves to be told." The gesture touched me deeply, not because it was grand or expensive, but because it acknowledged my agency in deciding our future. The old Brian would have assumed reconciliation was inevitable. "Thank you," I said, meeting his eyes. "This is thoughtful." "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, maintaining a respectful distance. "About what you said at the resort." about choices and the kind of man I want to be. And I called my parents yesterday. Told them if they ever want to be part of our lives, if there continues to be an R, they need to acknowledge how they treated you and make genuine amends. Not just empty apologies. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. How did that go over? A wry smile crossed his face. About as well as you'd expect. Dad hung up on me. Mom called back an hour later to tell me I was throwing away my heritage for. He hesitated. For what? For that marketing girl with no pedigree. Her words, not mine. I winced, though the insult had lost much of its sting. And what did you say? I said that marketing girl has more integrity, intelligence, and genuine class than the entire Caldwell family combined. Then I hung up on her. Despite everything, I found myself fighting a smile. Sounds like therapy is already having an effect. It's helping me see things clearly for the first time. He took a deep breath. I don't expect this one conversation to fix everything between us. I know we have a long road ahead if you even want to travel it with me. But I wanted you to know I meant what I said at Montauk. You're my priority, not them. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Thanksgiving plans are officially changed. If we're still together by then, I thought maybe we could go to your parents instead? I've always loved their Thanksgiving. After he left, I returned to the couch, the journal in my hands. I wasn't ready to forgive everything, not yet. But for the first time since the vacation, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps our marriage could be rebuilt, not as it was before, but as something stronger, more equal, more authentic. 3 months later. Are you sure about this? Brian asked, adjusting his tie nervously in our bathroom mirror. We could still cancel. I smoothed down my dress, checking my reflection one final time. They're your parents, Brian. We can't avoid them forever if we're going to make this work. He nodded, though anxiety still lined his face. I just don't want you to be hurt again. I'm not the same person they could hurt so easily, I reminded him. And you're not the same person who would let them. The past 3 months had been transformative for us both. Weekly counseling sessions had helped us communicate more effectively and identify unhealthy patterns in our relationship. Brian's individual therapy had been even more impactful, helping him recognize and challenge the dysfunctional family dynamics he'd normalized his entire life. We'd moved gradually from separation to cautious reconciliation. First with daytime meetings, coffee, walks in the park, carefully neutral settings where we could talk honestly. Then dinner dates where we rediscovered the connection that had drawn us together initially. Finally, a month ago, Brian had moved back into our apartment, now very much our space with equal input on every decision. Today marked another milestone, our first meeting with his parents since the disastrous vacation. A carefully negotiated lunch at a neutral restaurant, with clearly established boundaries and an agreement that we would leave immediately if those boundaries were crossed. Remember what Dr. Levine said? I offered as we gathered our coats. We're a united front. Their issues with me are issues with us both. He took my hand, squeezing it gently. United front. Got it. The restaurant was upscale but not ostentatious, with private tables well spaced for conversation. We'd arrived early intentionally, securing the psychological advantage of already being seated when his parents arrived. Margaret and Richard entered precisely on time, his father's expression unreadable, his mother's mouth set in a tight line. Introductions were awkward but civil. No hugs, just formal handshakes. You're looking well, Amanda, Margaret offered stiffly as we settled into our seats. Thank you. How was your flight from Boston? Small talk carried us through the appetizers, neutral topics like weather and Richard's adjustment to retirement. The real test came with the main course. So, Richard began, setting down his fork deliberately. Brian tells us you've been seeing a marriage counselor. His tone suggested he found the concept distasteful, but I refused to be baited. Yes, it's been very helpful for both of us. In our day, couples worked things out privately, Margaret commented. Family matters stayed within the family. Brian cleared his throat. Actually, that's part of what we wanted to discuss today. The definition of family and who's included in it. I watched his parents exchange glances. This was the new Brian. Direct, unafraid of confrontation when necessary. Amanda is my family now, he continued. My primary family. And if you want to be part of our lives, you need to accept that reality. Richard's face darkened. Now listen here. No, Dad. You listen. For once. Brian's voice remained calm but firm. What happened on that vacation was inexcusable. The way you treated my wife was cruel and deliberate. We're not here to pretend it didn't happen or to sweep it under the rug. Margaret's lips thinned further. I think cruel is a bit dramatic. We simply have certain ways of doing things. Putting my wife at a separate table wasn't a way of doing things. It was a calculated attempt to make her feel unwelcome. Brian looked directly at his mother. And discussing how to end our marriage over breakfast wasn't traditional. It was manipulative and disrespectful. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, Richard spoke. What exactly do you want from us? I decided to answer this one. Respect. Not approval, not enthusiasm, just basic respect. The kind you'd show to any human being, regardless of their background or pedigree. And if we find that difficult? Margaret asked, her voice carefully controlled. Then we won't be seeing much of each other. Brian replied simply. Our future, including any potential grandchildren, will not include people who can't treat both of us with dignity. The mention of grandchildren hit a nerve. Margaret's composure faltered slightly. You'd keep our grandchildren from us? We'd protect our children from toxic relationships, I corrected. Just as we're protecting ourselves now. The remainder of the lunch was tense but productive. No miraculous transformation occurred. The Caldwells didn't suddenly become warm and welcoming. But a new understanding was established. Clear boundaries were set. And for the first time, Brian and I functioned as true partners in navigating his difficult family. As we left the restaurant, Brian exhaled deeply. That was a start. I finished for him. Just a start. He nodded, taking my hand as we walked to our car. Thank you for being willing to try. That's what partners do. 1 year later, Christmas Eve found us in our Seattle home, surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of pine from our modestly sized tree. We'd opted out of the Caldwell family Christmas at their Boston estate, choosing instead to host my parents and sister for an intimate celebration. The past year had brought remarkable changes. Our marriage, nearly shattered by that fateful vacation, had been rebuilt on a stronger foundation of mutual respect and clear communication. Brian had continued his therapy, working through decades of unhealthy family conditioning. I had reclaimed parts of myself that had been slowly eroding, my confidence, my career ambitions, my independence within our partnership. His relationship with his parents remained complicated, but had improved incrementally. Small steps, a birthday call that didn't end in argument, a brief visit where Margaret managed to make it through an entire dinner without a backhanded compliment. Not warmth, certainly not the easy love I shared with my family, but a careful, evolving respect. More significant was Brian's transformation. He declined a promotion at his father's company, choosing instead to join a smaller firm whose values better aligned with his own. He'd established friendships independent of his family connections. Most importantly, he'd developed the courage to live authentically rather than according to the Caldwell blueprint. Penny for your thoughts, Brian said, handing me a mug of hot chocolate as he joined me on the couch. I smiled, accepting the drink, just reflecting on how much has changed since last Christmas. When I nearly lost the best thing that ever happened to me, he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear affectionately. When we both learned what we're really made of, I corrected. My parents and Jessica had gone to bed hours ago, tired from their travel. In the peaceful quiet of our living room, with only the Christmas lights illuminating our faces, Brian took my hand. I have something for you. An early Christmas present. He handed me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a small table. I looked at him questioningly. To remind us both, he explained, that you'll never sit at a separate table again. That we build our own table, together, where everyone is welcome and valued. Tears pricked my eyes as I fastened the bracelet around my wrist. It's perfect. I was thinking, he continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Maybe it's time to discuss expanding our table. If you're ready. My heart quickened. We'd put family planning discussions on hold during our reconciliation process. You mean? He nodded. I think we'd make pretty amazing parents, don't you? Especially now that we know what kind of family we want to create. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, we talked about our hopes for the future, a future that would include children who would never know what it felt like to be excluded, to be deemed less than. Children who would grow up understanding that respect wasn't something to be earned through pedigree or achievement, but a fundamental right belonging to every human being. The journey that began with that painful vacation had led us here, not to a perfect ending, but to a wiser beginning. I had learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That true love requires not just affection, but courage. That sometimes, walking away is the only way to find your way back to yourself. Most importantly, I'd learned that I would never again accept a separate table, in my marriage, in my family, or in my life. Have you ever had to stand up to difficult in-laws or family members? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of personal growth and resilience, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose themselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you deserve a seat at the table, always.